Right, good morning, good morning. I see a lot of you are still making your way in from breakfast, making your way in the room, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. It is my privilege to welcome all of you to the 45th Annual Charleston Library Conference. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Leah Hines. I'm the Executive Director of the Charleston Hub, and it's my job, my privilege to kick off the opening keynote session here this morning. This is our 45th year of the conference, but it is the first year that our conference founder, Katina Strauch, is unable to join us in person. As some of you know, she recently moved to North Carolina to be closer to family, but Katina is listening and joining us remotely, so I would like to give her a huge round of applause and thank her for her innovative leadership and spirit. Thank you, Katina. We wish that you were here with us. So we had a packed house yesterday for our sold-out vendor showcase. We had a day full of exhibits, vendor information sessions, lots of delicious food and drinks. And we also celebrated the one-year anniversary of Katina Magazine at the Katina Cantina with some karaoke special guests. So if any of you heard there, you know what I mean. It was an enjoyable time that was had by all. I'd like to remind everyone of our code of conduct. So the full text is available here on the slide or at the QR code, so please do take a look at that. And if you have any concerns, you can contact me or any of the conference staff at the information desks, through Whova, or by email. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for their generous support. The conference, as we know it, could not take place without the support of our sponsors, so I'd like to take a moment to thank them individually. ACS Publications, Bloomberg.com, Claravit, EBSCO, Elsevier, Frontiers, Sage, Taylor and Francis Group, AM, Bloomsbury Digital Resources, GeoRef with full text, American Mathematical Society, Cabell's, Cambridge University Press, CloudSource, Digital Science, Gale, JSTOR, MDPI, and Modern Language Association, Open Athens, Frankfurt Book Fair, IGI Global, IOP Publishing, OCLC, Paratext, and Trinka, ACM, American Society for Microbiology, Eastview Information Services, Hein Online, LLMC, Oxford University Press, Paradigm, Royal Society of Chemistry, Society for Scholarly Publishing, Springer Nature, STM, University of Toronto Press, and W.T. Cox. Please give them all a round of applause and thank the representatives when you see them this week. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our amazing group of conference directors. This is a large group of people who put in many, many hours of hard work behind the scenes to help craft this program, invite keynote speakers, choose topics, and just make this event the amazing experience that it is for all of us. So if you are a conference director in this room, please stand so that we can give you a round of applause. And Chris, I'll make you stand too. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And one of our longtime conference directors, Anthony Watkinson, is stepping down this year. Anthony has been a vital part of the conference for as long as any of us can remember. We're embarrassed that we cannot remember the date that he started as a conference director, but he might as well have been there from the very beginning with Katina. For those of you who remember the early days of the conference, when we were only in the Francis Marion Hotel or over at the Lightsey Conference Center, Katina had an antique bell that she would ring to start the beginning of the conference sessions, to call the sessions to order. If coffee breaks took too long, people were lingering over the conversations in the hallway, Anthony would walk the halls and ring the bell to bring people back into the session to start the conference. So in honor of his stepping down and retiring as a conference director, Katina gifted him the bell, had it inscribed in his honor, and I would like to ask Anthony to please stand and ring the bell to call the session to order for us today. Thank you so much, Anthony, for all of your service and for everything you've done for us over the years. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris Ferguson. Chris is the Dean of Libraries at Murray State University and one of our illustrious conference directors as well, and she's going to introduce our keynote speaker and moderate the session today. Thank you so much, Chris. Take it away.
Thank you, Leah. As Leah said, I'm Chris Ferguson. I'm the Dean of Libraries at Murray State University, and I have been coming to the Charleston Conference since 2001, I think was my very first Charleston Conference. And it has been a big part of my professional career. I think I've missed a couple here and there due to the birth of children and things like that, but this is my 24th. From year one to now would have been 24 years. It is a pleasure for me to be here today to introduce you to this morning's opening keynote speaker. Lorcan Dempsey is a librarian who has worked for library, nonprofit, and educational organizations in Ireland, the UK, and the US. He began his library career in public libraries in Dublin, Ireland, where he grew up, and his influence on library directions in the US, Europe, and around the world is widely recognized. He worked for over 20 years at OCLC, a global library services organization, and before this, he worked for National Education Infrastructure and Innovation Organization, JISC, in the UK. He has overseen national library informational programs in the UK and has managed 2 internationally recognized library R&D units. Most recently, Lorcan served a 2-year engagement as the Professor of Practice and Distinguished Practitioner in Residence at the Information School at the University of Washington. Drawing on his broad career experience, today he joins us here at the Charleston Conference to share his thoughts on career preparation in the context of libraries, archives, and museums. Please join me in welcoming Lorcan Dempsey to the Charleston Conference.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Do you think I look very washed out in that picture? Oh, it's gone. Yeah, I have spent the last 2 years teaching, which means I had to sort of come out of myself a little bit and actually ask people questions and talk to them. But I had that rather grand title, Distinguished Practitioner in Residence. So I like to think that now I'm the extinguished practitioner in residence, wondering quite what to do next. This is an overview of what I'm going to say. I leave it up for a moment so you can take some notes. I have to go quite quickly because there's so many slides there. This is what I'm actually going to talk about. And I'm going to begin in a way that I don't normally, but because of the topic, I thought I ought to say something about myself. But first, I thought it would be useful just to check how many people in the audience had an MLS. Oh, okay, more than I anticipated. How many people don't know what an MLS is? Okay, so I'm going to talk about library education, but I understand that for many libraries, they're recruiting across a broad range, but my concern is formal library education in relationship to libraries. ALA accredits those schools that are accredited. I'm not really going to talk about ALA. ALA, obviously, in some transition. The ALA process is very top-heavy, very heavy, and one hopes that it is looked at over the next while. Part of what did occur to me when I was in Washington was that these schools are sort of critical learning, research, and advocacy partners of libraries at a very critical time, and that the shared agency that libraries have through their organizations, ARL, ALA, ULC, ARLC, that perhaps they should be a little bit more focused on thinking about how those partners engage and help libraries at what is a very strange, difficult, challenging time. So, as was said, and as I say, I wouldn't normally do this, but I thought given the topic, I might say something about myself. I worked as a library assistant in Dublin Public Libraries for several years. The Dublin Corporation, which was my employee, had a scheme where they sent people to library school and paid their tuition. So I applied for that. I failed. They decided that I was not library material. So I took a career break, borrowed some money, and went to library school. Met my wife at library school, two librarians at University College Dublin. We moved to the UK, where I worked at the University of Bath for 14, 15 years, and eventually began to direct UK Office for Library Information Networking, a sort of R&D policy unit at the University of Bath. Then I moved to JISC, which many of you will be aware of. I was responsible for overseeing JISC's information investment, this sort of national services that are provided to higher education and further education in the UK. Then I moved to the US, joined OCLC. Jeffrey Beale, whom some of you know, wrote an article many years ago. He said, Dempsey appeared out of nowhere at OCLC. Well, I had a career before then. And then the last 2 years at the University of Washington. So I do, not having worked in a US academic library, not having gone to a US library school, I will confess at the beginning to some imposter syndrome, which is what this image is supposed to convey. I have written extensively, you know, in ponderous, in a very ponderous and extended way about LIS, library education, and so on. This is an initiative, LIS Forward, that was begun by the University of Washington in association with several other schools, looking at the future of library and information studies. I have quite a long contribution there. I've broken it up and put pieces of it on my blog website. Many years ago, I did a management seminar that Liber in Europe had a sort of professional development course, and I was one of the lecturers on that. And they made the mistake of sending everybody's evaluation out to all the presenters. So you could see what people said about all the other presenters and sort of snigger. But I was taken up short by one comment which said, well, Dempsey is better in print than he is in person. So those of you who want a print experience, which is better, can go here. Okay. So we live in Columbus. This was down the end of our street in 2016. I should have gone and refreshed it 4 years or whatever it was later. Untypical because we live in, you know, sort of quite concentrated liberal area, a lot of OSU city employees. And we've gotten used to thinking, especially at the moment, about polarization. I do think, though, as we think about this and as we think about education and libraries, we really are sort of becoming increasingly aware of this discussion about not just political preferences, but lifestyles and social values. We're aware of sort of growing inequality, the uneven social and economic impact of technology and globalization. Many of the iSchools, library and information schools, talk about the knowledge economy, the knowledge society, but it's been very clear that the benefits of such activity have been imperfectly distributed, and the corresponding aspect of it is deindustrialization and the way in which particular areas and regions have had some of their economic life depressed. 40 years ago, people with university degrees might have had mixed political views, might have lent conservative a little bit. Today, research shows that education does correlate to a great degree with lifestyle values, and people with university degrees quite strongly lean liberal, similar divisions around rural and urban. Not just political preferences, but you're seeing that values and identity influence very much an us versus them outlook. And we're in a situation where clearly we talk about the culture wars, but in a sense we're in a situation where those culture wars are going to continue for some time because of this affective polarization, not just ideological polarization around political views, but that gradually people are assuming values that go with one particular identity. And the media, obviously, quite polarized, social media, enforce a view into a very similar world to your own. So Henry Farrell, political scientist, talks about the big issue with social media is, sure, disinformation and so on, but it's a bigger issue is this, publics have malformed collective understandings because they see the world from one particular viewpoint and tend to react not so much on particular facts or whatever, but in relation to that view. And we're seeing some sorting then around that, people living in particular places, political parties more strongly of one point of view, institutions and so on. Carnegie has this ongoing series about how polarized we are. They say much less polarized locally, but do highlight that libraries are at the front line of culture wars, this polarized situation. So I say all of this because when I think about libraries, this is one of the nicest formulations of a library that I've come across. This is a previous chief executive of the Urban Libraries Council, and she's talking about public libraries, but I think you can think about all types of libraries. So she says, quoting somebody else, institutions are socially organized ways of paying attention. So hospitals pay attention to illness and health, police pay attention to crime prevention. Similarly, public libraries are society's way of paying attention to learning and equity. So they are a socially sanctioned, socially authorized investment in equity and learning. And in the United States, 20 years ago, we hold both in high esteem. So I think you can see where this sort of goes. If you think about the social organization, public investment in equity and learning, if you think about those types of public investments that support learning, that support investment, and the value that's placed on them, a range of organizations or institutions are now sites of some contestation or conflict, and it places libraries in a situation where they are focused on value, the value that they're providing in mixed communities quite often. and also on values and how to maintain those values in these types of environments. And these environments are complex, but they're also contested. There are social, political, funding environments that are complicated. As I was preparing these slides, this came up on one of my feeds. Apparently, university students are prepared to pay more to go to a college where they feel there's some political alignment with their views. This goes back to the sorting element that I mentioned. So the reason I began there was that I think if you think about education and you think about libraries, I think we're in an environment that is sort of shifting in various ways, and it's sort of at the outer rim environmental direction. However, it's also very real and practical in operational contexts for particular libraries at the moment, but it contributes to the sense of the library as a social organization, as an institution, and what does it mean to talk about the library. So the library. Teaching students, I was quite interested that very many of them came in with a view that the library was self-standing and also relatively static and understood and hierarchical. So I wanted to say three things just about the ways in which libraries are currently positioned and positioning. The first is they are institutionally responsive. They are not stand-alone. They are a campus agent and collaborator. They have to be aligned with what is happening on campus. And I think especially as, and this is something Chris said to me, that especially as you are seeing more ways in which information is available. Campus maybe are expecting libraries to do more, and if you think about the range of places where they do things in partnership, they're very much a campus agent and collaborator and not standalone. And I realize this is another public library example, but I thought this really encapsulated some of this change in quite a nice way. Pat Lozinski was the very successful director of Columbus Metropolitan Library's enormous expansion, new buildings. But he, on one event, stated, 20 years ago I was in the libraries business. Today I'm in the Columbus business. So he saw his job very much as improving educational attainment in Columbus, in welcoming immigrant populations, in helping with careers, that he was measured in the ways in which he contributed to community success. And we can see similar trends in the academic space. At the same time, libraries are getting more unlike each other because, Columbus Metropolitan Library may want to do things. Up the street, Ohio State University wants to help with student retention. It wants to make research more productive. It wants to think about how the intellectual, scholarly outputs of Ohio State are managed and disclosed. So what you're seeing is growing partnership with other parts of the organization, but also individual institutions becoming more different in a variety of ways. And that brings me into the second point, that libraries are much more relational. So in a collections-based library, services, organization spaces are configured by the management of the collection. In a relational library, services, organization, and spaces are configured by changing patterns of research, learning, and public engagement. So rather than the library being configured, its organization, its spaces, and so on by the collection, increasingly the library is configured by the services it provides to students, the services it provides to researchers, the way in which it participates in the life of the university. This is a picture from what I think is quite an important book edited by, I'm not quite sure about the order, Paul Brocky, whom I spoke to when I was preparing this, Sheila Carl and Tim Schlack. The Social Future of Academic Libraries. It's quite dense, but I think actually a very important book. I had it on a lot of the readings for the students over the last 2 years. They hated it. It was too dense. It was too academic, a little bit theoretic. Lots of very long bibliographies. But I think actually quite an important book. I was quite struck by this picture, fussy and difficult to read though it is, and also the expression that accompanied it. So Sheila Carroll, in one of the contributions, talks about or picks up the phrase life-wide learning and says increasingly the library is involved in life-wide learning, that dealing with mental wellness, student retention, thinking about how to set students up for success, thinking about the broader range of factors, attributes, behaviors that will help students succeed. And, you know, in this picture, she sort of lays out the variety of ways in which libraries are doing that across the whole life cycle. So you're seeing this move from sort of managing discrete items to thinking about life cycles, to thinking about workflows, to thinking about the ways in which people participate and show up in the institution and how they can be helped across that whole range. You can see a similar thing with research support. This is a picture which is a couple of years old now, from Keith Webster at Carnegie Mellon, looking at the research life cycle and then showing how, in this particular case, Carnegie Mellon has particular services that sort of touch those particular parts of the research life cycle. And what you have here, again, is the library trying to make the whole research process more efficient, trying to cope with all of the ways in which the researcher manufactures, discloses, uses information, which is now intricately tied into the ways in which they do their work. So this means that on campus, you're looking at sort of social interoperability, which is a phrase of one of my former colleagues who's sitting over here. In the campus, social interoperability for the liaison librarian who has to go out and make connections, make relationships, understand what people are doing, social interoperability for the AULs who want to be on university committees, who want to have relationships in the Office of Research, for the library dean who wants to be a full and active participant in the various places where they should be. And in this particular report, there's a variety of takeaways about how one might be successful doing that. But it is a relational. The other thing that's sort of driving things is you have a digital environment. So an informational element is pervasive throughout research and learning workflows. You don't just have a final outcome which gets published. You don't just have a book on the shelf. You have informational dimensions across workflows, across life cycles. You know, you're collecting data, you're looking at analytics, you're supporting research workflow, you're providing materials into the course management system. Inside-out collections is a phrase for thinking about research data, special collections that you're curating and making available to the world rather than outside in, which is things that you're licensing or buying. Very important. So this brings you to the third element of dynamic. And I've been quite interested, and no doubt there are some collection strategists in the audience, or directors of collection strategy. But over the last few years, I've been interested to see how strategy has come into this title. And the way I read it is because collections have become so complicated. You don't manage them necessarily. You take a strategic view of collections because you have to make choices about where to invest resources. You have to make choices about who to negotiate with. You have to make choices about open access. You have to, well, let's face it, you have to actually understand open access, and the variety of manifestations and colors and metals and China talking about rare earth minerals, that's the number of ways in which open access is named. But so this, I think, is a good example of how dynamic libraries have become. That it's a matter of trade-offs, it's a matter of tactics, it's a matter of decisions. And this is actually, throughout, what libraries do. And I've kept this in, even though it's a little bit busy. I mean, it's the way PowerPoint should be. But I was struck by, certainly, many of the students had a very static view of the library. But if you think about the library now, the value and role of the library isn't well understood. It's an ongoing negotiation on campus. It's an ongoing negotiation about what does the library do, how does it help, where does it fit. And it's not just about optimizing fixed capacities, it's about aligning capacities around evolving goals. And then if you think about all the individual areas, space used to be configured around collections. Now you're configuring space around experiences. Collections used to be the core of service and identity and were relatively static. Now you have collections as a service. You have facilitated collections where you're making available a range of things under a variety of circumstances from a variety of sources. You're making your own stuff more easily available. You're deciding how to collaborate within a consortial setting or what materials to send to an aggregator. You are thinking more carefully maybe about how you're distinctive in various ways, and you're looking at computational things. So it's really very complicated. Expertise, used to be thinking about cataloging, reference, whatever. Now you're looking at a mix of domain expertise, relational expertise, core social skills, research and pedagogy becoming very important. I did put a little poll into WOVA, and one of the things that came out was pedagogical skills. The org chart used to be well understood. Most org charts look the same. Now, if you look at org charts, sure, there may be a family resemblance, and you'll have some library directors painfully trying to show how they don't have a hierarchical organization, and they're really out the side here. But if you twist it, it's just as hierarchical as anywhere else. But what you do have is some variety. Now, there is quite a lot of focus on support for research, support for learning, but that organizational consistency is not quite there at the moment. And systems, you want to manage the whole library and its relationships. So you have repositories, libguides are libguide systems, I suppose they are. They cover libraries now like Ivy. Research and learning workflow, pervasive digital stuff that needs to be managed. So what you have is a very dynamic environment. And it's not just that, change is constant. It's that you have to sort of think about trade-offs. You have to think about how you do things. So the library is an ongoing adjustment to evolving circumstances. You've got the value and values bigger question. You've got the information environment with changing business, digital workflow, life cycle. You've got learning and research practices changing. Institutional priorities may come. You may have budget issues. You may have a new school. You may have, merger. And then, of course, you have AI. And I think what AI does is sort of intensifies all of these things and intensifies some of the changes brought about by the digital. And I assume that every presentation you're going to is talking about AI. So that's it for me. So what you end up with is all of these skills. Soft skills have become much more important because of the relational element, because of just dealing with people. You've got evolving skills, new skills that are coming out of the type of work. And then you've got management, social and political, organizational, people types of things that have also become a bit more complicated. And actually in the poll, several people mentioned, that they would have appreciated greater help with people management, dealing with difficult situations. And, obviously we've been through some very difficult years. So when you think about education, there's a big challenge for education. There's just too much. There's just too much to cover. You have a big question about technology. How deep do you go? Do you need to be, you talk to, within the iSchool, you talk to some of the non-library people. What's the future of libraries? More Python. But, how deep do you go on, technical things? And then you've got management. With the students, I did this thing called FUM scale, a future management scale. And, you ask at the beginning of the year, how many of you want to be managers? Oh, no, because they all want to stick it to the man. They want to, be not part of the capitalist hegemon. Now that's untrue, a small number, but, myself and a colleague did it in both our classes, and about less than 10% of people wanted to be future managers. However, most of them are going to be future managers because of the way that the work goes. And even if they're not managing themselves, they have to manage upwards, they have to manage outwards, they have to think about teams and so on. So the issue, though, is you're dealing with early career people who don't realize they need management skills. So how do you? So that does raise, all of these topics. You have to have specialist and knowledge skills. You have to have relational, social skills, much more important now. History and values are important, and values especially important, I think, in a contested time. Understanding freedom of information, understanding the position and role historically, I think, quite important. Political and social environments, increasingly important. I think people who work in an academic library need to have some understanding of the university structure, the pressures on the university, but also the industry that they're operating in, and the different players have different incentives. They have different contexts. If you think about that open access discussion and the way in which it could be improved. People in organizations, really quite important. So, a very wide range. Experiential learning, a big gap. I spoke to a student who'd been working for a year or two just to see, and basically they want resume-ready experience, but also then from an employer point of view, one of the librarians I spoke to, or a couple of librarians I spoke to preparing for this said, yes, we need people somehow that have a little bit more experience of having done things. So this is the student's resume-ready employer experience. So I'll let you read that for a moment. Again, this came over my feed when I was getting ready. It's sort of got a, I'll read the punchline. Modern teaching method, ride bike. And it's got a gratuitous AI image. I mean, really, I said the other day somewhere, AI is the new Clippy. I mean, Microsoft Copilot is the new Clippy. I mean, at one stage during this, it said, do you want a high impactful slide or something? And I said, well, that'd be good. And then it gave me some really dross. Okay. A little known feature of PowerPoint. Okay, so this means that the school has a challenge, has a big challenge. While I was teaching at University of Washington, sadly, my father died. And went back to Ireland for the ceremony. But my father was a high school teacher, secondary school teacher. He taught English. I was one of his students. But the thing that struck me was just how many lives a teacher touches, how many lives are touched by a teacher. And I was very struck by the 2 years I spent in the University of Washington, just how rewarding it could be to touch lives, and then be touched in turn by the experiences and so on of the students, and without succumbing to vocational law and understanding all the difficulties and so on teaching. I think this is an important and valuable time and space. So, in a US context, there's a huge variety of schools. And that variety is in multiple dimensions. There are different histories, different deans, which can have quite an important influence. There are different styles of home institutions, research universities, teaching-oriented universities, different departmental homes, iSchools, communication schools, education schools. And then there are different degree offerings and collaborations. Just as an example, this is the University of Washington, and it's sort of, not dissimilar from other of the sort of iSchools and more research-oriented institutions. It's got a BS in informatics, very large, very popular. So informatics being, computing with more of a business and social applied element, MLIS, and then it's got an MS in information management, sort of more general, and then not as commonly museology. You look at the strategy, the strategic objectives. Actually, at this level, no mention really of library. They have increased access to information science education, information science, a very elastic term, strengthen the information school identity, renew the future of the field of library and information science, since it's really the LIS Forward initiative. So what strikes me about that is the focus on the academic discipline of LIS, fuzzy, blurry though it is, rather than the profession, the social organization, or whatever. Not a criticism, just saying, it's interesting that there's a focus on the discipline. Institutions have quite a lot of concentrations and also quite a lot of partnerships. Some places will allow you to do an MPA jointly, an MBA jointly, a degree in history jointly, and it varies, and again, I imagine strongly influenced by local politics and local circumstances. This is an example of a much more strongly focused sort of professional school. So you look at the mission at University of Southern Mississippi, and a very much diverse population of qualified professionals. So very focused on that professional school, that credential, people working in libraries. Various institutions, schools have different pathways to cater for the variety. This is the example. Kent State, the only accredited library school in Ohio. And many of my former colleagues, for example, at CLC, would have MLSs from Kent State. Some of them actually earned through a satellite in Columbus. And this is an example of the types of ways in which they might concentrate. But if you think then more generally about those schools, I think very reductively you could identify a couple of, centers of gravity. And if you think about the iSchool in a research university, the iSchool has morphed into this sort of bigger group that has a variety of informational disciplines in it. And if you think about some of the ways in which that might be challenged in that research university context as an identity question, what is information, what is an iSchool? There's also a sort of symbolic capital issue, and this is something that library education has struggled with. Library education has had low prestige, low symbolic capital in the research university context. So libraries were subsumed into sort of information science, or library and information science. Library and information science subsumed into a broader informational iSchool. Or many have shut down, many have gone. So symbolic capital issue. And the LIS Forward report highlights the issue of pipeline, the availability of qualified faculty coming in. There is discussion about, the status of the MLS in the portfolio. Does it struggle for attention? And then I think if you're in a research university, you'll always have this pull between being an academic discipline or a professional school. And you are subject to research R1 incentives, like hiring, tenure, funding, and so on. In a school with more of a vocational focus, you do have, some are quite small, more of a focus on credentialing, partnership, use of adjuncts. So I think if you look across the situation, you've got, a pink collar, profession, prestige issue in some places, a history of closure, merger, and then dealing with university incentives. In some places, they cope very well. Teaching and learning, there's certainly a big growth in online and online asynchronous, desire for more experiential learning, question about preparing for technical skills or for management or both. How do you combine them? Is there a market for stackable credentials, mid-career certification and various things? And then this challenge of diversifying requirements. The research that comes out of LIS schools is very interesting, very good, in particular areas, but in general, it doesn't tend to have a big impact on current questions of the day and the way that some other areas might try to. So from an innovation and influence point of view, you also have, what's the role of LIS faculty in the community? So I was going to say something very quickly about cross-lamination. I might move through this quite quickly. I do think that one way in which the schools are moving is this additional institutional weight for library and archives and museums. And you can see a variety of reasons why that makes sense. One reason is identity. It gives you a stronger identity. Another reason is these are all institutions, going back to my beginning, they're all institutions that are part of that public support for knowledge and learning. So, they're similar in some ways, they're very different in some ways. But I think the idea of pulling them together in a teaching context is thinking about weight and then thinking about the social role and the issues that come out of that, the organizational issues, the political and social issues. And then they also have a variety of technical information management and other issues. They're very different. They've got different curatorial traditions. They socialize differently. They socialize in different organizations, professional associations, and so on. But I think pulling them together in a way gives an identity and a focus that LIS doesn't quite have. So, to conclude, I, in thinking about things, do think that there's a gap here, and it's a gap at a very critical time. It's a gap at a time of difficulty and challenge for libraries. So it does seem to me there are a variety of organizations, ARL, ACRL, ULC, ARSL, consortia, individual libraries. There are people with agency in this space. And on the academic side, there are people with agency around iSchools, ALICE, and then you have LIS Forward, you have ASIST. And it seems to me that there are three areas where that gap might be closed a little bit. CF is the coalface, and CR is the classroom. So scale experiential learning. It's quite clear that people want more experiential learning. So can those library groups with agency coordinate to provide, or a consortium, or individual libraries coordinate to provide more structured opportunities for in-library learning in various ways? This seems to me a challenge at the moment for a profession that wants people coming through and is in a situation where it's dealing with all of what we spoke about earlier. The second thing is to scale career learning. Can you coordinate or collaborate to explore the demand for more stackable, flexible, career-aligned certification that maybe is more available throughout a career? And the third, which has had some discussion already in various places, is to think about a shared research agenda developed between sort of CF and CR, not that you act on, but actually just provides a warrant that says these are issues that are important, and then maybe greater collaboration between the people doing the library research. And you can see some movement around this in LIS Forward, but also ACE's draft strategy talks about trying to foster research at scale that sort of has more of a bearing then, or more of an impact on the profession, by trying to encourage collaboration around an agenda. So I will pause there and say thank you.
Thank you so much. This has given me quite a bit to think about in my own library about how we train and support people who are either early, mid, or even late career. I would like to invite, we have 2 microphones up front. If people have questions, I would invite you to come forward and ask your question at one of the microphones. And while we're waiting on kind of folks from the audience to come forward, I'm going to pose this question to you, Lorcan. How does, I think you've talked about the changes in iSchools and that some have closed, some have altered their curriculum. How do you feel, or what do you think the impact of, I think many iSchools, the one in Kentucky, I know for certain that's at the University of Kentucky, has moved to an online-only format. What do you think about this transition to online education, and how does that impact librarian preparedness?
Yes, I think that, quite a few institutions offer online and asynchronous education. I think that, when it's done successfully, it needs to be sort of blended with a variety of ways in which people can have engagement, the ways in which they can potentially have experience. I think it's inevitable in the current environment that we're going to see more of this, so a lot really depends on how it is made apparent. I do think from an experience point of view, what I have heard through is that you potentially have people, if they do an online course, and if they're not actually already engaged in a library setting, they're a little bit distant. So I think that whole experiential side is very important.
Peter McCracken's down front.
At Cornell University. I've been involved, of course, a little bit with the University of Washington iSchool, but I am a proud graduate of the best damn library school in the country, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And as I'm sure you know, there's this thing that's happening where it is being combined with a newer, I think, smaller school. And a friend from library school was just saying to me yesterday, what are we supposed to think? What do we do? And do you know more about that? What do we...
I don't know very much more about it. I was going to go back in I have hidden a couple of slides at the beginning, and they probably showed in the overview, so some of you saw them. But I had a slide of the press release from UNC, and I also had a slide about a cover of a report that Gary Marcignonini and colleagues did about, 12 years ago, about what LIS education would look like in 2050. Now, 2050 is an implausibly far out date, and obviously they didn't realize that this was going to happen in 2025, which is half of 50, actually. But I think it's a signal. My understanding is that it was announced, and now they're scrambling to work out what it means. And I think it's a signal of 2 things. One, it's a signal of identity. This is a school that has a long history and many distinguished people, but people don't know what LIS is. They don't know what IS is. They don't know what libraries do. They have potentially low prestige there. So I think it's a signal around, and I don't know. This is speculate around the prestige that such institutions and disciplines have in those settings. The second thing is, I think people look at it and say, oh, information, it's a set of techniques. So you put it together with another set of techniques rather than it's a social organization. So that's partly why I was thinking about libraries, archives, and museums. I think you have to build up the idea that this is education about a social organization and an institution. It's not just a set of information techniques, more Python. It is, but it's these other things also. But I think this is in line with a range of things that we've seen in different places over the years.
Hi, Lorcan. Lisa Hinchliff at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And as a practitioner who's also been teaching in the iSchool at Illinois for more than 2 decades, certainly some of these things sound really familiar to me. One of the things I'd be interested for you to reflect on and share your experience with is the degree to which there's been a real shift in the funding for LAS education, in the sense that I think people who went through a library science program in a certain period of time had an assistantship, it covered their expenses, and now we have people coming into library schools with $60,000 to $80,000, maybe more, of undergraduate debt, and then they are being faced with additional $20,000 to $40,000. So you're coming out of library school into a low-paying profession with $100,000 in debt. And so I'm wondering if you could reflect on the degree to which you see the iSchools engaging with the real financial dynamics of the graduates that they are turning out, and what kind of things they're helping with in our market to make those jobs honestly viable, because I mean people want to have a life.
This is where my information or my imposter syndrome, really ramps up. You're probably better qualified to answer that question than I am, or there are other people in the room. A couple of things strike me, though. One of the reasons for thinking about somehow the experiential learning and having maybe library organizations or individual libraries think more about how the connection works and that experiential learning is partly to address this type of issue where you do have a more structured way of providing paid employment. I mean, you do have things like directed field work and so on that are certainly in the case have experience of, not funded, not paid. So, some students will feel I'm paying tuition to do work that I'm not being paid for, which is, ramping up the issue that you highlight. So I do think it's partly for that reason that I thought that the library community has agency through several shared organizations, and beginning to actually put it on the agenda that that a vibrant library workforce is something that might require some work, and this is a big area where you want to help good candidates come through, and one way of doing that is to connect them in a more structured way with opportunities which might have some remuneration. It is interesting the huge variation there is in cost. And I mean, this is obviously one thing that is driving the online asynchronous, and how much do I want for a credential versus how much do I want for a full, broad education.
I am so sorry, but we are out of time. I'm going to have to close down questions. Lorcan is here at the conference if you would like to approach him. I would also encourage you to reach out via Whova. I know there was at least one question in Whova, so please reach out and you can contact Lorcan directly with additional questions. Thank you to everybody for coming this morning. Round of applause for Lorcan.